After the treatment, the next most important thing that you're going to receive from the production company, from the director, whoever it is sending this stuff through, is the original storyboards or the initial storyboards from the agency. Sometimes you have them, sometimes you don't. I really love when agency boards come through, depending on the job, of course. I like when they come through because it gives you an immediate world from which to play, right? Sometimes the hardest part about pre-production is just understanding the sandbox that is being constructed for you to work in. Agency storyboards can be really effective at that because they haven't had the input from the director, or sometimes they have, sometimes they haven't. But more often than not, they've been done to show the director what the agency is after. So it's much different from a director's storyboards, which should be done. Generally, they are done after the locations have been decided on and after you've gone through the scouting process, and you may have shot a few photo boards in the actual locations. Those are much more detailed, and you can use those a lot. A lot of the times I'll use those for lighting diagrams, which we'll get into in a future module, just how I do that. But director storyboards are much different from these initial storyboards, which are, again, just to give you the idea of how big the sandbox is. And it serves the purpose, much like the treatment document, it serves the same purpose in that it's hopefully you are understanding a list of questions or a list of problems that you're going to have to tackle. Now, when I say problems, I don't mean problems in a negative way, right? Just things that you're going to have to overcome, things that you're going to have to identify and deal with, and choices that will have to be made in order to deal with those situations. So you should be looking for, if you get agency boards in the project that we just looked at, that car spot, and there are these big, vast, giant landscapes. Well, now you know that you're going to be much more dependent on the location and the weather and the time of day. So now that completely changes our questioning with the first AD and with the producer and the director about, okay, if we're only doing this in a day and we have these giant sweeping exterior shots, what does that mean for us in terms of how dedicated are we to the look that you're after of this magic hour stuff that is all in the treatment? So it's linking the treatment document, which is what the director would like to do, and the agency options, which is what they've brought to the table. Now, sometimes, you'll reach out to the producer or the director and they will say, oh, don't completely ignore the agency boards or completely ignore that aspect of it. But until you get that ticked off, it's something that you should keep in the back of your mind, right? You're trying to marry up what you saw in the treatment with what is expected from those initial storyboards, and how then you can start to put your stamp on the change that you can affect inside of those images. Okay, how far off can we diverge from the storyboard images? How flexible are they going to be? If you see that the agency boards come in or the initial storyboards come in and they have 45 shots all listed out and beautifully articulated, and it just looks fantastic, well, that they've probably had a hard time selling this to the client, and they've had to go above and beyond to get them on board. They may be trying something different, so they've really had to sell it to them. So chances are on a project like that, you're probably not going to be able to deviate very much because they've sold this very specific thing. But sometimes you'll get no storyboards, right? Which again is a little bit trickier because then you have to go out and communicate your way into understanding the size of the sandbox or the type of sandbox that you're going to be playing in for this specific production. But other times they'll just be loose frames or maybe key frames for product or for pack shots or something like that. Those will be storyboarded out. But in that whole storyboarding process, even going up to the director storyboards, you just want to provide as much input as you can into those storyboards. So as they build and develop, you can definitely, which is something that we haven't really touched on just yet. But in the commercial world, for a cinematographer, as soon as you get that job, which we talked about is probably the hardest part of becoming a cinematographer, is getting the job. But because there's so many people involved in the process, there's so many decision makers, that it is very easy just to coast through a job. You don't have to have any of this input. You don't have to do any of these things. You can hire the right people. You can look at the storyboards, look at the treatment, just come up with this stuff on your own. The question that you should be asking is that serving your career? Is that serving the project to the best possible end result that it could achieve, right? Like, is that propelling you to where you want to go? If you just coast along and don't do any of these things, you may get by for a few projects, but you'll start to see that you're not really growing. You're not producing work that is exceeding expectations. You might be able to luck into it on a few projects, But really, pre-production is about maximizing the possibilities that you're going to be successful, maximizing the possibilities that you're going to get something that you can be proud of and something that you not only created in your own mind, but then you went out there and executed it, right? Which is much easier than going out there and not being prepared and trying to run and gun and shoot everything from the hip and have great ideas, but just not have the time or the equipment or the gear necessary to execute them. So dream big in pre-production, go big, try and figure out where your boundaries are, right? Never undersell to the production, never undersell to the producer, to the director. You should always be saying, this is what we're capable of. Like, we could do this. Imagine how great this would be. And then let them pull you back. Let the producer be the one to say, whoa, 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 no, no, no. Like, it's only scheduled for a day. Yeah, but imagine if we could do only magic hour stuff, right? We'd have to do 3 days, and then of course you're gonna get pushback. And this is something in pre-production that you should be well aware of, that you're gonna get constant pushback. If you're not getting pushback, you're not pushing it hard enough, because you are the person that is looking after the visuals. No one else will push harder than you. So you might as well make it your job to receive pushback, right? If everything that you're asking for is just getting ticked with approval, just like, yep, we can do this, we can do that, we can do this, you can have that, you can have this, you can have this amount of people. Well, you got to push it harder. You got to say, well, this is, let's try this, let's make it this big, let's do those 3 days instead of just shooting 1 day. And then once you receive that pushback, well, now it's about letting the people in charge know what their options are. Again, from that storyboard base, you can start to realize these things and start to see, okay, we can push them in this direction. We can tell them that, well, for those magic hour shots, we can get 1. So decide on the 1. Or we could do it over the 3 days and get all 3 scenarios in that magic hour. It's up to you. In those 3, if we do it over 3 days, we'll need less crew because we can rely more on natural light, which means we won't need a generator, which means all of these different factors. You just have to go down each path that you might possibly take, or that the production might possibly take you on, and realize the pros and the cons of that, and then regurgitate that back to the production so that they know their options, right? Because you're just consulting. You're the person there trying to help out. But realistically, it comes down to their money, their budget spends, their reputation, all of those things. So you can, try as hard as you will, but ultimately it comes down to, more often than not, it's a question of money, time, resources, and the cinematographer, for better or worse, doesn't make all of those decisions when it comes to allocating those things. So storyboards play a huge part in understanding your sandbox, getting to know when you can push the limits and where you should be pushing the limits. And if you don't have them, that's okay. But I'd always be asking production, do you have boards? Does anyone have any boards made up that'll just help me in that process? And that's something you can easily do with just an email. Reach out, let them know that you're interested in seeing any of those and that you'd like to have that, to comment on it, to use as a springboard in your preparation process.